We are here in Salisbury near the Great Marsh to come back to a spot that I found a couple of days ago riding my mountain bike out here. I've been collecting data about fiddler crabs in the Great Marsh, which extends from, say, Gloucester all the way to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I believe we may find some fiddlers, just based on the way that the banks looked when I saw it last time I was out here. So here we go. We're gonna go see if we can find these guys.
Woohoo!
All right. So we're here. This is the spot where I saw the creek that looked like the banks could be a good spot for fiddler crabs. They were very muddy, and a lot of the edge of the marsh is sloughing off into the creek. And at a lower tide, you can rarely see that. Today, we're just after high tide, so we're not going to see a lot of what's inside the creek bed, but we're going to look for the crabs on top of the marsh because they make burrows in the grass, in the cord grass right next to the creek. And then down the bank, they also make holes so that they can feed from dead plant material. They are called detrivores. So they eat detritus, or dead things. And that's beneficial to the marsh to help process and break down living matter, so it's usable for other forms of life. And it's also believed that the fiddler crabs are beneficial to the marsh because of the way that they make their burrows in the mud. By putting so many cylindrical holes, some of them are 4 feet down in the mud, they help to aerate the soil of the marsh. And that when you aerate the soil, you get a healthier marsh. You get a healthier ground where the grass can grow, basically. So when I first came here, the tide was lower, and I was looking at the creek, and on the banks, it looked like an ideal habitat for fiddler crabs. Fiddler crabs require warm temperatures between 65 and 78 degrees to be active. Otherwise, they get dormant, and they live in these burrows in the sides of the creek. And they can live there for months. They can overwinter inside these burrows. It's a perfect habitat for them because it provides shelter. It also provides food for them in the form of detritus, which is broken down plant material that comes from all the grass in the marsh and is also part of what flows in and out with the tide. And they're able to eat that detritus. And they take their little claws and they roll the soil around, removing the detritus, and then they leave the mud behind, and it looks like a perfect little pellet. We're approaching the fiddler crab habitat, and we're now down onto the marsh. We've gone from the uplands. You can look back at the cliff that we were on there. All right, so there's a lot of granite rock features out here just on the edge of the marsh, and that has to do with the way that the marsh was formed 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. At the end of the ice age, as the ice melted, it deposited all these rocks high up here on the shore, while the marsh formed over thousands of years of grass like this dying and building up and dying and building up and making the peat that is the marsh. So what we have here is Spartina patens, or salt meadow grass, salt meadow cord grass, I believe it's called, or marsh hay. And this is the stuff that was harvested by the settlers to feed their livestock. It was very valuable to them because at the time there wasn't a whole lot of places to graze their animals. It was a pretty hostile environment if you went 10 miles inland, so they had to stick close to the shore and use the salt hay. Mrs. DeLacey just put the camera on this interesting plant. It's called the Salicornia europa. The Salicornia has another name. It is the marsh pickle. And speaking of the early settlers, they would take this plant when it turned all red and was ready to pick. These start off green, but you can see this one's starting to ripen and become red. When they turned red, they would pick them from the marsh and then pickle them in jars, I suppose, right? Over the winter, so that they had a source of vitamin C. It prevented them from getting scurvy because there was no way to get fresh vegetables back then, so they knew this was a vitamin C source. And it's actually very delicious. If you were all out here with me, I'd be sharing this with you now. Maybe I'll bring some into school so you can check it out one day. It's crunchy, delicious, and it's salty, and it tastes like popcorn. Salicornia. In the marsh are these molts. So the crabs have an exoskeleton, and as they grow, they shed their entire exoskeleton, even down to the details of the legs, right? So these are horseshoe crabs. They love these creeks to come up in here, and this is kind of a nursery for the younger ones. And they grow. There's lots of food here for them to take advantage of.
And when they shed their skin, they're molts, right? They get a little bit bigger each time, right?
Each time, they grow and they shed their skin.
Just like crabs.
Yeah. This tail, which a lot of people mistake for a stinger, is actually just to right them. If they flip over, they can correct themselves. So it's a way to steer. to swim.
Very cool.
Well, you wouldn't want to step on one of those.
Nope.
In searching for the fiddlers, if we find them, we have to do a few measurements here in their habitat. We have to measure some abiotic factors. The salinity of the water and the compaction strength of the soil.
What are abiotic factors?
Oh, they're factors in a habitat that are non-living but still impact the living things in the ecosystem. They're non-living, so the salinity of the water, salt is not alive, nor is water, but it's very important to their survival. And the compaction of the soil is non-living for the most part, and although it does contain lots of nutritious stuff in it, but it's non-living factor. And its compaction strength, that is how easy it is to dig into it, will determine whether or not the fiddler crabs can make their burrows. Because if it's too soft, their burrows cave in. If it's too hard, it's too much work for them, and they'll find another spot. So I test those two things.
Looks like you have some tools here.
I do, yeah. You need so everything is in a dry bag. So everything is in a dry bag. You'll probably see us using these some more later on when we do our kayak trips. And yeah, here's the. It's called a penetrometer, and you literally will take this and stab it into the ground, and then up here is a scale that tells you the strength of the soil, how much resistance it gave to that.
Huh. Looks like an EpiPen.
It's kind of like well, that's just my way of testing it. Yeah, kind of like an EpiPen. And this shows you in grams per square centimeter, or another way to understand that in English would be in a ton per square foot. So how many tons in a square foot of ground? 12 inches by 12 inches. It's 1 ton
Awesome.
of resistance to that. Yeah.
It also looks like we have a shovel, small rake,
So yeah,
trusty
these.
bug spray. Always
Uh-huh.
need that.
Yep, this is plastic so it doesn't rust. And the idea is when you were searching for these, we're often in the cord grass and in this Spartina Peyton's grass too, this salt meadow stuff. And so you use the rake to kind of brush everything aside to look for their holes. And when you find one of their holes, you have to sink the garden shovel in deep in the hole, hopefully behind the crab, so it blocks off his or her ability to escape you down the hole. They're trapped and they'll come out, and you pick them up. And our job is to identify to make sure that they are fiddler crabs. And then on my phone, I'm going to geotag the location where we found them, because that's what this research is all about. What is their distribution? How far is the population spread in the ecosystem of the Great Marsh? How many of these little habitats, these little side creeks, have they made their way into since 2014? And so far I've gone out 8 times and found them every time. So I think that their distribution is pretty widespread. Although this is the farthest I've ever looked for them away from the ocean, right? Like we're well up here, 3 or 4 miles from the ocean. In the salt.
Pretty, really remarkable spot.
So along the edge of the creek, there's a very definite line where one species of cordgrass gives way to another.
Ooh.
This cordgrass is the Spartina alterniflora. It's salt marsh cordgrass.
The taller one.
The taller one. It has all kinds of adaptations for its habitat. We'll talk about them later when we go to Joppa. But it's able to withstand a lot of salt and bend over and stand back up. It has joints in it. It's very interesting.
Sometimes if you like put your fingers on it, you can lick them and it tastes like salt.
Oh yeah. Wait, see? Taste that.
Mmm. Yep.
Salt.
Salty.
Yep. It actually has glands that takes the salt out of the salt water and gets rid of it through its leaves and then uses the water for photosynthesis. It's a cool adaptation. Now I was looking here and I was brushing aside the Peytons and not finding any holes. And Miss DeLacey looked over here where the alterniflora is and check this out. It looks like we've got some fiddler crabs.
Crikey.
Crikey. And do we have any pellets, feeding pellets? It looked like about the half the size of a sprinkle. We'll look for those as well.
Looking for feeding pellets.
Feeding pellets, where they've cast away the mud that they're not going to ingest. Right here. These are all feeding pellets. Can you see those little lumps?
Yes, I can.
See if you can get a picture of those.
Oh,
They're
yes.
like
Those
tiny
little
chocolate sprinkles.
Yes, like chocolate sprinkles.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Now, would this be like all the same crab? All these holes?
All
or
of
is
these
this a bunch
holes
of-
are the trademark shape of a fiddler crab. They are cylindrical, they're round. Other animals that make their burrows in the side of the marsh include mussels, but their holes are more oblong. And then green crabs also make larger burrows, but these are the only ones that make these size and shape holes. We're going to see if we can get one of them to come out of their hole. Hopefully some of these holes are inhabited. So many of them.
Would that mean there's a bunch of different fiddler crabs making these, or just one that like moves around?
So that's a great question. And the scientists that started this research counted the holes and the number of fiddler crabs is generally a 2 to 1.
Huh.
So for every 2 holes is generally 1 fiddler crab. So this is what we call a colony. So let's see if we can get one out.
Colony is like a group of something.
Yep, a colony, which is really another way to say the population in this area. I thought we had him in there. Here he comes.
Oh.
Somebody's home.
There he is.
And it's a male. So this is going to be interesting. If I can get him out. The males are pretty cool to look at because they have a very large claw. They have bimorphism in their claws. One is shaped like a big crusher and it can be twice the size of its body. And the other claw is smaller.
Oh, I always thought that was for every type of crab.
Well, it's very exaggerated in the fiddlers. Yeah. The way that they the size of their claw and the way they wave it around is meant to attract mates and also to fend off anyone who's going to try to hurt him. Like this guy's not going to be happy with me when I get him up here. I'll get him. Here he is.
Wow. He does have a really big crusher claw.
He's going to be lively. He's not going to put up with us.
It's not
That's it. We put the specimens in. So I'm going to use a yellow background for this guy. Okay, so we have a definite ID. We can take a picture of Mr. Fiddler Crab. Now he's getting mad and waving his claw around. He's angry.
He's crabby. Crab over here, there's a bunch of holes, and I can actually see one. I just saw one coming out. So.
Oh, good.
And I see the little pellets. I
Let's
see them way more on that, actually.
Mr. Lacey,
You see all the little pellets?
you're the crab whisperer.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to go down there and grab him. Now make sure he's going to come out of there, so be ready to grab him.
Oh, God, I see him. Have him.
Oh, good size one. Hold on to that claw.
Cricky.
Hold, pinch him like that, yeah. Yep, that's it. You got it.
Can you guys see him on there?
Cool.
All right, and so that's a big crusher claw. We could call that a really nice adaptation that they have for, you said mating, to attract a mate?
They wave them around to attract mates
And also for protection,
protection.
obviously.
These colonies, they actually protect their territory against other colonies of crabs pretty aggressively. And sometimes they even during mating season will have, the males will fight with each other with those claws.
And crabs, what? They have 8 legs?
8 legs,
1,
2 claws for 10. I believe it's a decapod.
And it's a crustacean, right?
Yep.
Cool.
These also have exoskeletons, just like the horseshoe crabs that we showed you earlier. So they will shed them as they grow. So you can sometimes find their molts around an area. Speaking of molts, here's one right here. Look at the difference. There's a baby horseshoe crab. Oh.
Man down. Baby horseshoe crab and a fiddler crab. And the interesting thing is if you find one that just molted, they tend to be kind of squishy or like gelatinous. So they are really susceptible to predators or just getting injured.
So when they do that, they usually stay in their burrows. They don't like to come out and feed or do anything when they're molting. Another adaptation because they're too vulnerable to predation.
Cool. All right.
Cool. Nice, Jess.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can find a female.
Yeah, so...
Mr. Krabs is a fiddler crab. Look at his eyes on those eye stalks. Okay,
so cute.
So Mr. Lacey put a geotag on this location, and I'm able to share that information with the scientists who are doing this research down in Virginia. I can just take a screenshot like you're going to see in this presentation and send that to them. And eventually we'll hopefully have a whole map of where they are.